Hello guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this story. Let's get started. My name's Charlie Anderson, and for a long time, I thought I had it all figured out. I was married to the woman of my dreams, Jessica. She was everything I thought I wanted. Beautiful, smart, and, as far as I knew, completely devoted to me. We met back in college. I was studying engineering, and Jessica was on her way to becoming a lawyer. We didn't meet in one of those fancy law or engineering classes, though. Nope. We crossed paths in a creative writing class, which we both sort of ended up in by accident. Our last names stuck us next to each other, Anderson and Baxter, and that's how it all started. Now, I wasn't the best-looking guy on campus, but we just hit it off. We laughed together, shared jokes, and before I knew it, that friendship turned into something more. We started hanging out outside of class, grabbing coffee and going to movies, and before I knew it, we were a couple. One night, after a dinner out, things got a little more intense than I expected. What was supposed to be just a goodbye kiss turned into a lot more, and I ended up waking up in Jessica's bed the next morning. After that, we were inseparable. By the start of the next semester, we were practically living together. As time passed, we grew closer and introduced each other to our families. I took her to my place for Thanksgiving, and I spent Easter with her folks. By Christmas, we were back on campus, enjoying the break in our own little world. After we graduated, everything seemed perfect. I got a job with a solid construction company, and Jessica landed a position at a big law firm. Life was busy, but we made time for each other. Weekends away, cozy nights in. 7 years flew by just like that. As our wedding anniversary rolled around, I started thinking about the next step, starting a family, maybe buying a house, settling down. But when I brought it up, Jessica didn't seem as eager as I was. We hadn't really talked about it before, and it turned out she wasn't in the same place I was. She was happy with how things were and didn't feel the need to change anything just yet. Then, a few days before our anniversary, something happened that rocked my world. I was in the kitchen making dinner, like I always did, when Jessica walked in and casually dropped a bombshell. "I've got a date this Friday." At first, I thought I misheard her. I mean, who just walks in and says something like that? But she repeated it, like it was the most normal thing in the world. She even threw in the guy's name, Chris, or as she liked to call him, Chrissy, like it was no big deal. I was floored. The woman I'd spent years with, the one I thought was my forever, just told me she had a date with another guy. I asked her what was going on, if she was unhappy, or if she wanted a divorce. My mind was spinning. Jessica, though, was cool as a cucumber. She said she was happy, but since I'd been talking about family and all that, she figured she'd try dating. She had this ridiculous reason about wanting to see what else was out there. And apparently, Chrissy was the most attractive guy who ever showed interest in her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So what? You're just going to throw me away like an old toy?" I asked. "Come on, Charlie. You know I love you, but it's just something fun I want to try. It's not serious." I felt my blood boiling. "I don't care if it's serious or not," I snapped. "You shouldn't be dating other men. You're my wife." She rolled her eyes, like I was overreacting. "Charlie, you're being dramatic. It's just one date." "Well, if it's such a minor thing, then I'll go on a date too," I shot back. Jessica laughed, like I just told the funniest joke in the world. "You? On a date? You couldn't get a date by Friday if your life depended on it," she said, practically doubling over with laughter. "It's easy for women, but for guys like you? Good luck." Her words cut deep. I felt humiliated, but instead of lashing out, I decided I had to get out of there before I did something I'd regret. "I'm too angry to think straight right now," I told her, and with that, I grabbed my keys and headed over to my buddy Mark's place. Mark and I go way back. He's the kind of friend who doesn't need explanations. I showed up, and without asking any questions, he handed me a beer, and we spent the evening like we always do, watching TV, cracking jokes, and just hanging out. For a few hours, it felt like I could push everything aside. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of a storm I wasn't ready for. The next morning, I arrived at work with a pounding headache and a few minutes late. For the first time, Megan, our office administrator, noticed something off about me. Megan had always been kind to me, even though we weren't especially close, and she chose not to say anything. My boss, if he noticed at all, kept quiet as well. I guess I had built enough of a reputation for being reliable that one rough morning didn't raise any alarms. That evening, I came home, still carrying the weight of the day, and I didn't feel like making dinner, but old habits die hard. Patricia came in right on time, as usual. I could sense the tension before she even spoke, and sure enough, she couldn't resist a jab. "Back from your little temper tantrum," she sneered, her face smug. I barely looked up. "Any updates? Still planning on finding yourself a date by Friday?" she continued, her words sharp with arrogance. I stared at her, feeling a distance between us that seemed to widen with every conversation. When had things gotten so bad? When had the love, the joy, just vanished? I stayed calm and told her again, "Patricia, if you go on this date, it's going to destroy us. I'm not joking. If you don't cancel it, I'll be going on a date this Friday too." I braced myself for another dismissive comment, but what she said next cut deep. "Oh, really? And who are you going to go out with, George? Megan from your office?" She laughed, cruelly. "She's old enough to be your mother, weighs as much as a hippo, and her husband would probably kill you if you even looked her way." Her words hung in the air, dripping with venom. "Who else is left? You got no options at work. So what? Maybe you'll ask one of the guys out. Good luck with that." I looked away, my heart heavy. How had we reached this point? Was this the real Patricia, or had something changed her over the years? Either way, her words were like acid, slowly eroding what was left of my affection. I headed to the bedroom in silence, too drained to keep arguing. Later that night, she came into the room, probably surprised to see me already asleep. Normally, I'd initiate some kind of closeness between us, but tonight I had no desire for it. I didn't even care. She didn't wake me, which was unusual. Our physical relationship had always been one of the constants in our marriage, and suddenly, it felt like everything was falling apart. By midweek, things only got worse. When Patricia came home from work, she found me on my phone, furiously typing. We had this rule, no phones at dinner, but I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. I didn't even look up when she came in. "Trying to make me jealous, George," she smirked. "No kiss today? Too busy texting about your big Friday night plans?" Her voice was dripping with sarcasm. She pushed further. "Who's texting you? Megan? Or is it Robert this time?" She laughed louder, turning it into a full-on cackle. Each word from her chipped away at what was left inside me. My feelings were shriveling, leaving nothing but a growing resentment. I lifted my head, slowly, and said, "Patricia, this needs to stop. You're killing our marriage with these jabs and jokes. If this keeps going, I'm telling you, we won't survive." For the first time, she fell silent, but only for a moment. "Oh, George, relax. It's just one date. You'll survive," she shrugged, brushing off my warning as if it were nothing. "I just want to know what it's like to go out with someone incredibly attractive, that's all." I clenched my jaw, frustrated beyond words. "We made vows, Patricia. What we have is supposed to be special, and you're tearing it apart." I didn't wait for her response. I turned and left the room, leaving her alone to stew in the kitchen. The next day, something shifted. Patricia came home to an empty house, and when I got back later, my appearance caught her eye. I had gotten a fresh haircut, styled in a way I hadn't done in years, something like how I used to wear it when we first met. "New haircut for your big night out?" she mocked, making air quotes before laughing again. "I'm sure Robert will love it." I ignored her, walking past into the bedroom to change. But when I came back, she was already waiting, a smirk playing on her lips. I saw Victoria's Secret bag on the dresser. "Interesting choice for your just a night out." Her words were like poison, seeping into everything. "What kind of lingerie did you buy? You never wore anything like that for me, not even on our honeymoon." I clenched my fists, anger boiling inside. I could barely keep it together. Her words were pushing me to the edge, and yet, she acted like nothing had changed. It was like she didn't even see what she was doing to us. She continued, "You have to be a special kind of person to stay the most attractive guy around." She glanced at me, a playful smile on her face. That was it. My patience snapped. If you go on that date on Friday, I said coldly, we will never be intimate again. She giggled, brushing me off as usual. Oh, you're always so desperate for attention, George. It's always about you. I looked at her one last time, hardened by everything we had been through, and walked out of the room. The ultimatum was on the table, and this time, I meant every word. Friday came, and Patricia returned home to find me fully dressed, ready for the night. She barely acknowledged me, already focused on her own plans. I didn't care anymore. We both had places to be, and I didn't need her approval. She left, meeting Ted for her date. And just like that, the divide between us grew even wider. Ted was charming and attentive, keeping her entertained all night. After dinner, he suggested they continue the evening at his place, and Patricia, eager for an exciting night, readily agreed. But the moment they got through the door, Ted's demeanor changed. He pushed her onto the couch and sneered, "Bet you love being easy prey." The words cut deep, and all the excitement evaporated. She managed to slip out of the situation quickly, salvaging what little dignity remained. Going home felt like defeat, so she headed to her friend Emily's place instead. She spun a story about having a fight with George, and Emily welcomed her with open arms. They spent the night watching romantic comedies and drinking cheap wine, trying to drown out the frustration. The next morning, Patricia woke up with a pounding headache and the unpleasant reminder of the night before. Emily suggested they go shopping to shake off the hangover, and Patricia, not eager to face her reality, agreed. When she finally got home, it was much later than expected. She assumed George would be there, brooding over the fight she had made up. But the apartment was empty. It wasn't until she glanced around that she noticed something was off. George's things were gone. His work boots weren't by the door, and his side of the dresser had been cleared out. She rolled her eyes, smirking to herself, thinking it was just an overreaction. "He'll come crawling back," she muttered, imagining him groveling to make amends. Days passed, and Patricia's amusement started to fade. By the following Saturday, George still hadn't returned. No calls, no texts, nothing. She toyed with the idea of calling his parents or his friend Robert, but her pride got in the way. He left, she thought. If he wants to come back, he knows where to find me. But he never did. 2 weeks went by, and the silence was starting to get to her. Patricia found herself replaying their last conversation in her head over and over. She had casually mentioned going on a date with someone, never imagining it would lead to this. George had stormed out of the house, and now, apparently, he was serious about leaving. The thought of him actually going through with a divorce seemed ridiculous, but then, one morning, a letter arrived from his lawyer. Patricia was stunned. A divorce? Over one date? She glanced at the letter, scoffing at the formality of it all. After 7 years of marriage and 2 years of dating before that, this was how he wanted to end things. Patricia couldn't believe it. She stuffed the papers into her briefcase and told herself this was just another one of George's dramatic stunts. Surely, he'd come to his senses soon. But the days turned into weeks, and the void left by George's absence started to grow. Patricia found herself eating dinner alone every night in their condo, the silence weighing heavier with each passing day. It wasn't until she began to truly miss him that the guilt started to creep in. Maybe she had gone too far this time, but admitting that was something she wasn't ready to do. Desperate for answers, Patricia decided to reach out to Robert. She knew where he liked to hang out and deliberately orchestrated an accidental run-in. When Robert saw her, his first instinct was to avoid her, but she caught him before he could escape. Their greetings were strained, and the tension was obvious. Robert knew exactly why she had sought him out, and he wanted no part of it. "Enough with the games," Robert finally snapped, his frustration boiling over. "You're here because you want to know where George is. You think I'll help you? Screw you, Patricia. George loved you, and you treated him like trash. You broke his heart, and now you're shocked he's filing for divorce?" Patricia blinked, stunned by Robert's outburst. She still didn't fully understand. "Come on, Robert," she said, trying to smooth things over. "This is just a misunderstanding. If you tell me where to find him, we can fix everything." But Robert was done. He had seen the way she treated George, and he wasn't about to help her now. "Patricia," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "We both know you're not here by accident. You never cared about George. And now you're surprised that he's finally had enough?" Patricia stood there, speechless. For the first time, it began to sink in. Maybe this wasn't something she could simply fix. Maybe George really was gone for good. I stood there, expecting Robert to help, but instead, he hit me with words I wasn't ready for. "You came for answers, but I don't have any for you. George worshipped you, and you threw it all away for a casual fling. He warned you, but you laughed in his face, and now you're shocked that he's moving on? Let him go, Patricia. Enjoy your pretty boys." With that, he brushed past me without another glance, walking away like I didn't even matter. His words stung, but I shrugged it off. I convinced myself Robert was no different from the others. Just another guy trying to get close to me, not worth my attention. Yet, deep down, something didn't sit right. I felt this nagging urge to talk to someone. But who? Emily? No way. She'd always dreamed of a guy like George. My parents? They loved George. They wouldn't be any help either. So, I decided to do nothing. Time dragged on, for months, until I got hit with court papers, and I knew I couldn't avoid it anymore. Reluctantly, I hired a divorce attorney from my firm, one who specialized in cases like mine. As I laid out my situation, the attorney was blunt. She advised me to go through with the divorce. I hesitated, holding on to this faint hope that I could still save things. But the flood of legal questions made me realize where I stood. "Have you talked to George since he left?" she asked. "No," I mumbled, almost ashamed. "Are you still seeing Connor?" I felt my defenses rise. "Not Connor. He turned out to be a selfish jerk, but I have needs too." "Do you really think your husband wants to reconcile?" she pressed, and I faltered. Doubts started creeping in. Had I wrecked something good? Still, part of me believed that if I could just talk to George, we could fix it. In the end, I agreed to meet with him, though I knew divorce was coming. When we met at his lawyer's office, I was shocked by how good George looked. Meanwhile, I probably seemed like a mess, worn out, barely sleeping, stressed beyond belief. Yet I still didn't fully grasp what was happening. After some small talk, I couldn't help myself and asked, "George, what does this all mean? I went on one innocent date, and now you're filing for divorce." George sighed, his patience worn thin. "I warned you, Patricia. I told you this would destroy us." His voice was calm but firm. "Do you really think that date meant nothing? You didn't even sleep with the guy? What about the lingerie you wore for him? The stuff you never wore for me? You loved flaunting yourself, just like you did before. You made me feel worthless. And I was the one you said you loved?" His voice rose, frustration spilling out. "No, Patricia, it was always about you. What you wanted, what you needed. This marriage? It was never about us. And for the record, I went on a date that same Friday. It went really well. In fact, I'm planning to marry her as soon as this divorce is finalized." George stood up, leaving me stunned. I sat there, speechless, as the full weight of everything finally hit me. I had ruined it all. But it was too late now. He was done, and I was left with half the assets, including the apartment. Years passed, and I went through one shallow relationship after another. I dated handsome men, dealt with health issues, and saw a therapist who made me face the truth. I needed to grow up, but by then, it was too late. The regret of losing George was something I'd carry for the rest of my life. I had pushed away the one man who had truly loved me. Meanwhile, George's life moved on. That fateful date I dismissed? It changed everything for him. He wasn't texting Megan or Robert anymore. He was texting someone new. Megan, a colleague of his, had always seen through me. She didn't like me, and when she learned George had fought with me, she sensed something had changed. Over lunch, George told her everything, and Megan, always looking out for him, gave him her daughter Abigail's phone number. That night, George wasn't talking to me, Megan, or Robert. He was texting Abigail. She was a bright, successful woman, 3 years younger than him. And from what he told me later, she had a smile that lit up any room. When she eagerly agreed to go out with him that Friday, I wasn't even a thought in his mind. Their relationship blossomed. Soon after our divorce was finalized, George married Abigail. They shared a genuine connection, built on love, trust, and everything I had never given him. Their marriage was full of passion and joy, the kind I could never quite grasp. And there I was, left alone with my regrets, haunted by the choices I made. George had found happiness without me, and I had no one to blame but myself. This is the end of today's story. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.